Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It is the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today is a big day. The COE is kicking off a second channel, which is Best Talk in True Crime. I modeled it after sports talk radio. It's nothing on the air. That's just talking true crime all day. And a lot of best guests came to me and they said, hey, I have a real job, unlike you, but I do want to do something maybe 1 or 2 days a week. And so people are going to be slowly launching shows who are best guests. So Greg and Megan, if that's of interest, we'll talk after the show. But that's happening today. You know, we're off to a rocky start because the COE is doing a story on Maddie Soto, the young 13-year-old in the Orlando area who was sadly allegedly murdered by her mother's boyfriend. We're kicking off with that story, but the sort of the part about it that is disturbing is she asked me to be her guest. So I will be her guest on the inaugural show here. It's going to be at 2:00 on the other channel, and the COE and others will put the link up. Today we're pivoting back to Kouri Richins, Kouri Richins. She is a Utah mom accused of giving her husband, Eric Richins, 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. Not once, but twice. Once on Valentine's Day, 2022, and then a fatal dose was given to him, I believe it was a few weeks or a couple of months after that, and he succumbed to that poisoning. She faces charges of aggravated murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, forgery, mortgage fraud. The trial is scheduled for April, with separate trials for additional charges on the mortgage fraud and forgery. Joining us today, Greg Skordas. He was representing. Are you still representing the Richins family? I caught you last night on Ashley Banfield, Greg, and it said you're still representing them. Are you?
I'm the spokesperson for the family, technically not the legal representative. I am an attorney, but in this capacity, I am the spokesperson.
There you go. And no better spokesperson than Greg Skordas. He's practiced law since '82, began his career at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association, and he is a very formidable criminal defense attorney. And then you've got Megan Connor. Hard to believe. She is the mother of 6 spectacular human beings. She herself is a survivor of sex trafficking as a child, spent almost 40 years in abusive systems. She is now teaching a e-course, on how to identify and defend against manipulative people. I think we all need that. So it's e-course on how to identify and defend against manipulative people. And you can get a link by emailing Megan at askmegan@gmail.com. Now, Megan, in this email you sent me, there's 2 E's in Megan. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right.
I just do that because people pronounce it wrong all the time, so might as well spell it correctly.
So it is AskMegan, Ask Megan, 2 E's at gmail.com, and I'll give that out again. Right. Yeah. Greg, I mean, first, an obvious question. There's 2 trials set here. Why is that? Why can't they? Because they're trying what appears to be some of the other. They're putting some of the insurance fraud and some of the forgery, I believe, into the other trial. Am I wrong about this? Why sever it?
No, you're exactly right. So you can try a case if it's all part of what's called a single criminal episode. And what they've decided, Joel, and without getting into the weeds too much on the criminal end of it, is that these were separate acts, separate episodes, and they're sort of the post and pre-homicide, if you will. So I think that they've separated pretty much along those lines. And yes, there will be 2 trials. It was the defense motion to separate the trials so there's not to give the jury too many options at a conviction at a single trial.
By the way, this is a noon show. If you're listening at a different time, and we're always loose and have a little more fun during the day. I don't know why. So STS Nation, you got two bright minds here on this case. Feel free to pop in with questions, put a triple Q in there, and I'll get them to Megan and Greg. Now, Megan, you and I were talking off camera, trying to keep up with some of this Mormon crime. Now, there's plenty of other crime going around. I'm dealing with the Alexander brothers, the Adelsons. There's a case to be made of some Jewish crime. I guess it affects everybody, but it does seem like there's some odd cases coming out of Utah specifically. You and I were talking about the so-called Utah Adelsons. This is a mother, a daughter, and a son who were Googling Donna Adelson, who, by the way, has some sort of court date tomorrow that we're trying to figure out exactly. But they were Googling the Adelsons, who at least one has been convicted already in the murder for hire plot of Dan Markel. But this case is eerily similar, where you've got the ex-brother-in-law who shot and killed the former brother-in-law, claiming it was self-defense. Prosecutors say there's no way. They have a lot of evidence to prove otherwise. But what is going on in the state of Utah, Megan?
Well, I can't, credibly speak about what is going on in that state since I don't live there. But there does seem to be a
However,
rise.
you were a Mormon for a time, at least.
I was Mormon for the first 45 years of my life. I am a seventh generation Mormon. My fifth great grandfather joined the church right when it was starting up in 1830. So my entire family is Mormon. But I will say, I think there has been a rise in interest in Mormon true crime. I don't know if statistically more Mormons are committing crimes, but definitely since Netflix put out their documentary about the Mark Hoffman case called Murder Among the Mormons. And then you had Under the Banner of Heaven, which also discussed a Mormon true crime. And then, the rise of the Secret Lives of Mormon Housewives, or whatever, the TikTok moms, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. So there's been a rise in interest in Mormons who either commit crimes or, do things that are not in accordance with what their professed beliefs are. And I think that's part of the fascination about it, is that most people know the LDS people. And I will say, 95% of the LDS people that I've ever interacted with are beautiful, wonderful people trying to live happy and healthy lives. And that's really the truth of it. And so I think it's shocking for us as a society to see the cognitive dissonance there that arises when somebody from such a wholesome community, wholesome background, is involved in true crime or in scandalous affairs or things of that nature. I think it's fascinating for people to see the juxtaposition there.
Very well said, as I expected. But it is, as Kouri points out, a very small percentage. Most people in Utah going about their day-to-day life, living happily and enjoying all there is to offer. So Kouri was back in court last Thursday. So was Brian Kohberger, and we took Brian Kohberger. It was an evidence suppression hearing, and you see her attorneys were back in court to conduct that as Judge Richard Mrazek, who's got a beautiful voice. The attorneys were back in court to conduct an evidence suppression motions hearing. The pretrial hearing was brought before Judge Mrazek to consider 3 motions regarding key pieces of evidence. And we'll get into some of this in a little more detail. Some of the stuff that we're looking at was cell phone data, statements she made to police when they pulled her over in 2022. On the right side, the infamous walk the dog letter, which we'll explain and get into, as well as a notebook from her home. The defense team arguing that the police did not get the right warrants before collecting various pieces of evidence amounting to unreasonable search and seizure and interfering with her right to counsel, which might be a stretch, but we'll get Greg's take. But Greg, what was interesting here, so this past Thursday, a bunch of law enforcement officers from the Summit County Sheriff's Office took the stand, and they basically said publicly in court that Kouri was not the prime suspect. He's Detective Driscoll, who I believe is the lead detective. even said he went to her house like 3 weeks before. She was incredibly upbeat. They weren't really looking at her. She almost could have gotten away with what appears to be murder. What do you make of that?
Yeah, the reason why they were going into that is because she was being questioned and she wasn't given Miranda. Miranda applies, Joel, when a person is in custody and they're being interrogated. In other words, they're the suspect or the prime suspect. She was in her home, which certainly was not custody, and the detective said she was not the question was she your prime suspect? And the detective said no, because at that time he didn't even know for sure if this was an accidental overdose. And so he was sort of looking at the broader picture and said, no, we were questioning her. Certainly, I think it would be a stretch to say she wasn't a suspect, but the question was she the prime suspect? And the answer was no. And the reason I think that was important is just because when she was questioned, she wasn't given Miranda, which again only applies to what we call a custodial interrogation. And this was not such a thing. And that's why the suspect issue was important to that particular inquiry.
Greg laying it out, of course. Megan, to you, this is obviously an issue in Lori Vallow's case, your cousin, an issue in so many cases, the Adelsons, the poor kids, no parents suddenly, so sad. What is your take here on the, I guess, the selfishness, blindness, whatever you want to call it, of these perpetrators, including Lori, who go and take away the children in her case, but in other cases, take away the parents and leave the kids parentless? What is happening here?
I think that it's an interesting question, and it's one that it baffles me as a mother, to think that other mothers would act in such a selfish manner. However, if you look at the behavior of people like Kouri and Lori, you'll see that their actions lay out this pattern of doing whatever it takes to get what they want. So in my mind, I really don't think Kouri is thinking about her children until after the fact, when, of course, she writes this book about how to deal with grief. And I think that was sort of a play for more attention and also to take the attention away from her possibly being a suspect. But really, when you look at it, it's a pattern of behavior, of selfish behavior, where they don't take into consideration the effects of their actions on other people. And it sort of looks like this lack of empathy. They really don't care how their actions affect anyone. They just want what they want, and they're doing whatever they can to get that.
We're going to get into a little bit of the weeds on this in a few minutes, but the defense team for Kouri Richins said, and I quote here, Greg, this goes back to some of the issues at the home. And you just heard Greg talking about she was not read her Miranda rights. But here's a direct quote from the defense attorney. The warrants were improperly issued because the supporting affidavits lacked particularity and were overly broad. As a result, the searches violated Kouri's rights under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 14 of the Utah Constitution. Now, I mean, Greg, this is the job of an attorney, and it sounds very attorney-ish. You're hearing the Fourth Amendment, and then the Article 1, Section 14, which I know you have memorized, of the Utah Constitution. Is a defense attorney here just barking up the wrong tree? I mean, this happens every day in every jurisdiction. I mean, I know you've got to be careful with the warrants, but does she bring a good point, or is it just attorney gobbledygook here?
Well, a little bit of both, Joel. And I actually do have Article 1, Section 14 memorized, because it is an exact copy of the Fourth Amendment. That if you put them side by side, they're the same. They're virtually the same, which does state the Fourth Amendment that when you're searching a home, a warrant has to be based on probable cause, and it has to, and this is right in both of those constitutional amendments, particularly describe the place to be seized and the items to be, or the place to be searched rather, and the items to be seized. I didn't have it memorized as well as I thought. But the Fourth Amendment says you have to be particular. You can't just go in a home and say, we're looking for signs of a murder. You have to say, we're looking for fentanyl. We're looking for writings or maybe some research that she's done on her computer about hiding murder, that kind of thing. So that they would be looking particularly for certain things. And what happened was a notebook was found that was just this orange notebook. And they're saying, where's that on the warrant? Where does that exist? You know what I mean? You can't just go in and say, well, we're going to start looking at notebooks. And so there was some evidence that came out of that notebook, which was harmful to the defense. And they obviously want that suppressed. And they're saying that wasn't in the warrant. That wasn't being particularly described in the warrant and should be suppressed. Now, again, I'm getting
Greg, can I just stop you there? Because I'm obviously far from as intelligent as you. But when you are executing a search warrant, isn't it the word search? Like you're going in there to look for things. So how are they preemptively going to say, hey, we're going to put this orange notebook that we don't know exists into the search warrant that we're going to then go search and find? That's the part I'm kind of getting lost on.
So you're right. You're right. I guess they could have had in their warrant writings that she made that would have described what she is intending to do. And apparently that wasn't in the warrant. I don't have the warrant. It's sealed for the most part. So I don't know what they were looking for. But the defense has said, and I don't even know that the judge is going to exclude the notebook or that it's that critical of evidence. Only that it wasn't particularly described in the warrant. And you're right. Law enforcement officers can't just go into a house and know exactly what they're looking for. That's the whole purpose of a search warrant. So by definition, they're often broad. I think the defense is saying this one's just a little bit too broad.
Megan mentioned this, but for those who are new to this story, Kouri Richins, who's accused of killing her husband, then wrote a children's book about grieving for her own kids and went on a local Salt Lake City, Utah TV show to discuss the book that she was profiting from no longer because it was taken off of Amazon. Megan, I mean, I know you're not a psychologist, but you're a very good observer of human behavior. I mean, this is a whole other level of sort of crazy, which, we're used to from Lori Vallow, but just to be able to write a children's book for your 3 boys and then go on a Salt Lake City TV show and to be alleged as to having committed these crimes, it's bordering on demented. So what do you think she was doing here? Was she just trying to throw off authorities? Do you think she was thinking that deeply, or is she just completely, for lack of a better term, psychologically, I will use a psychological term, is she just crazy?
Yeah, that's the clinical term, right? Crazy. I think, my theory anyway, is that she wrote that book to sort of divert attention away from her possibly being a suspect, but also to gain some attention. Again, when we look at the pattern of her behavior, it was all about Kouri and how people perceived her. And so writing a children's book about grief gives off a public perception of a mother who cares very much about what her kids are going through. Unfortunately, she paid someone to write it. It was a ghost written by someone else. And she was the one who actually called that local Salt Lake, I think it was Good Morning, Utah. And she asked to be a guest on that show. And, they saw her as here's a grieving widow who's trying to help her kids through grief. And what she claimed on the show was that there just weren't very many books out there, resources out there for her boys who had lost their father. And that's just not the case. There are plenty of books about grief for children. Many of them have done very well. I believe Maria Shriver wrote one. So there's plenty of resources out there, but she was claiming that there weren't, and then going on the show to try and, I think, garner some attention for herself and paint herself in this light of being a great mom and an author.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know that I knew this, and I don't know if Megan, do you happen to know Linden, Texas, that she paid a ghostwriter to write the book? Is that true? Do we know this?
Yeah.
Wow. So that's even worse. She didn't even write it herself. She got someone to pay for it. I did not know that till just now. So back to
Yeah,
the
and
art.
not only
Oh, go
that,
ahead.
but sorry to interrupt you. I was able to actually read some of that book before it was taken off, and it's really not a book about grief. It's a book about not grieving. It's the kid asking, "Are you with me?" And the book sort of reassures this kid that the father who's passed away is with them all the time. And when you have that sort of mindset of somebody being with you all the time, that's not grieving the loss of someone. That's wishing that they were still there with you. So it's a little bit delusional anyway. And I can't take total credit for that idea. I do watch a lot of Hidden True Crime with Dr. John Mathias, and he was the one who helped who helped develop some of those ideas.
Yeah. Shout out to Hidden True Crime, a friend of ours, Lauren is. Why is Kouri's name on the book? Because someone's asking in the chat because she paid someone, and I guess you could do that when you pay a ghostwriter. You can put your name on it. Look at this. Canine Catherine, our friend in Maui. Megan is an honorary psychologist, well earned from life experience and self healing. So much respect. Megan, tell us about this new program, this e-course that you're giving.
Yeah, so I know that there are a lot of manipulative people out there. There are a lot of unfortunate victims of, these type of people who try to take advantage of somebody who is kind and empathetic. A lot of people unfortunately get into relationships with manipulative people and end up in coercive control situations. And I certainly have a lot of life experience with that myself, and have done a lot of healing from that, as well as reading and research about human behavior, sociology, psychology. So I developed an e-course that will help people to identify manipulative behaviors and defend against people who are manipulative. So I think it's an important discussion. I think it's something that is useful to a lot of people out there so that we understand the tactics and how to protect ourselves.
Mm. So Greg, here's a question, and I was talking about this with Megan off camera. It's also hard to keep up with the different families and how they're interacting. For example, Courtney Clenny, the OnlyFans model, her parents were arrested for tampering with evidence when they took her laptop. In this case, there is a mom, Kouri's mother, a woman named Lisa Darden, who was with another woman for many years, and that woman died mysteriously. Has anything come of that, Greg, before we get back to Thursday's hearing? I mean, do we know if they're investigating this death? Because some people described it as suspicious. Is that something they might do in the future? Where do we stand with Kouri Richins' own mother?
Well, Utah law, Joel, doesn't have a statute of limitations on murder, so I guess that will always be investigated. However, it was so long ago, and the evidence is so far in the past that I don't know that they would ever be able to bring a case for that. But you're right. Kouri's mother's significant other died of a fentanyl overdose, an opioid overdose several years ago. And in fact, Ms. Darden was the beneficiary of her life insurance. So the similarities between the two homicides or alleged homicides are just, I don't know that you could make that up. And that's something that's been interesting, but I don't know how and to what extent it's going to be admissible in Kouri's case, probably not at all, or whether her mother will ever be prosecuted, just because there's probably just not enough evidence out there to bring that case to court.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess, but I would be curious to see what happened in that case, but it's bizarre nonetheless. So, Greg, back to this orange notebook. So this was a topic of conversation at this hearing this past Thursday. They seized this orange notebook. It turns out that apparently what it is writings that Kouri had jotted down between she and her therapist. The defense is quoted as saying, the officers opened the notebook, read its contents, and then sought an amended warrant with authority to seize the notebook. They claim the contents are protected by physician, doctor-patient privilege because they were for Kouri's therapist. again, I'm still kind of confused about this whole amended warrant, but what about this, Greg? I mean, in other cases, I know you've had to come across this where there's got to be privileged information between a psychiatrist or some kind of therapist and potential defendant. What's the law say about this?
So there's a lot to uncover there. But first of all, with respect to the warrant, if you go into a house with a warrant, you're looking for, let's say, drugs, and you find a gun with blood on it. Well, you're not looking for a gun with blood. So you can back out and change your warrant based on something that you've seen in the house. You were there legally, you saw it, you observed it, now you want to seize it. The question in this was, the notebook wasn't just obvious contraband. It wasn't just something that had obvious information in it. They had to open it. And they may not have been allowed to do that under the warrant. And that's what the defense is challenging. So going and getting a warrant for something you've already looked at, arguably wrong, doesn't cure that problem, doesn't cure the search. And so again, I'm talking too much legalese here. But you and Megan seem to understand. I hope the audience does as well. But you go in the house, you find something, you go, oops, we're not supposed to have this. Let's go get a warrant so we can seize this. But you've already opened it. The cat's sort of out of the bag.
Yeah. For some reason, my iPad, today's always a tech issue du jour. We should actually do that. The tech issue du jour. Today, I can't write on my iPad to take notes. But Megan, apparently Kouri was kind of seeing another guy while this was all going on. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do we happen to know, and Greg can help out, I guess, if not, what's up with him? Did he kind of just fade away into the background? Do we know? Is there any possibility that he is being looked at? Do we have any clue?
The only information that I knew is that there was a text message that came out that Kouri sent him a text message, "I love you," about 30 minutes before she served allegedly the Moscow Mule. That was the only thing that I knew about the boyfriend. Haven't heard anything from him since. I'm curious, Greg, if you know anything.
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Megan. There was some communication between Kouri and the boyfriend, to the extent that, soon we'll be together and, we'll be able to spend time together. We're going on this trip. They'd actually planned a trip, which would have been awkward if she'd still been married or her husband had still been alive. So that all goes into her motive. What we know about him is very little. My guess, and this is only a guess, is that he is going to be cooperative with the state, and that if he is subpoenaed, he'll come in and he'll tell the truth. That remains to be seen, but I assume that he's probably much more comfortable being a witness than a co-defendant. So he'll probably play ball with the state.
That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But Detective Driscoll, who is the lead investigator here, he testified, Greg, that the search warrants, and forgive again my ignorance here, targeted copper cups and counterfeit pills. The pills I get. What's the deal with these copper cups? And during a traffic stop, he said that Kouri willingly gave her phone password, I guess, to get into her iPhone. But what's the deal with these copper cups? What is that?
Well, I'm just assuming that Eric drank the poison cocktail out of a copper cup, and they're probably looking for something that would corroborate that, or maybe they could find some residue or anything at all. I mean, it was so far after the fact, it'd be highly unlikely, but that's my guess there, is that was something that they found at what was then an overdose scene. They found a copper cup or something like that, and they were looking for those to see if there were others or something they could match with.
Yeah. By the way, I should have known that, but that's pretty fancy. Like, in your house, you've got copper cups for a Moscow Mule. Like, if it was me, I'd make the Moscow Mule maybe, but it would be in a styrofoam or like a paper cup. So I wasn't even thinking about that. Yeah, I guess you're right. So the next big issue here is the so-called walk the dog letter. So Greg, if you can, just explain what this letter is and why it's so controversial. I've got some sound from the hearing last week that we'll play regarding, and then we'll get into it. But what is this now infamous walk the dog? You can actually see a bit of the letter right there on the right where it says walk the dog.
Yeah, so this is a letter that law enforcement found in Kouri's cell. The issue, of course, is do they have a right to search a cell? And the law is fairly clear that there's no expectation of privacy to the items that you have when you're incarcerated. So the letter was written ostensibly by Kouri. I can't imagine who else it would have been. And in addition to asking mom to walk the dog, it asks mom to ask her brother, Kouri's brother, to say certain things. It appears on its face to be an attempt to tamper with evidence or to create a narrative that's not true by saying, hey, mom, you need to talk to my brother and tell him to say A, B, C, and D, and that will help us. That Eric was a drug user, that he bought drugs in Mexico, things that are just absolutely untrue. But it's certainly incriminating to Kouri. She's asking it to be suppressed, sort of as that it was really an attorney-client conversation. But again, I don't know that she was ever asking her attorney to go walk the dog. So it wasn't something that was meant to be for her attorney. That would be, I think, the state's argument.
Yeah. And Megan, again, Kouri claims it was quote unquote a fictional story. But as Greg pointed out, the letter also mentions 3 different mortgages, a close friend, concerns about appearances regarding their communications. The state said, hey, look, you're trying to influence witnesses. The defense is saying privileged information. But, Megan, you could be on the jury. I could be on the jury. And they're going to, I believe, see right through this. I guess the big picture issue is, legally speaking, is it admissible? But do you have any doubt that if it is allowed in as evidence, I mean, people are going to read through the proverbial tea leaves here and know that Kouri was trying to send a message to her mom and brother, right?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the reason for the cell search was that she had held up a piece of paper during a video call, and they were concerned about a safety issue and a non-compliance issue with that. So they searched her cell, they found the letter. And just to say, if it is a fictional story that she was writing, it wouldn't be considered privileged anyway. So it would be admissible, right? And if it is something that she's writing that's fiction, it goes right along with the Daybell case, where not very creative, because it's way too close to what's actually happening in the person's life. And some people have been pointing out in the chat, she doesn't seem too bright. Well, she thought she was going to get away with this, and then if you look at her internet searches, the day after, she revealed a little bit too much about what's going on in her mind. So if it is a fiction, it's right along the lines of Chad Daybell, where we had to use real lives, but change, a few names and details, but it's stunningly close to reality.
And Greg, to you, from Teresa here, doesn't it have to be marked as legal or attorney on the actual, because this is now in her jail cell. What about that, Greg? Do you have to have like big yellow writing saying attorney on there?
Well, I guess the short answer to that is yes, attorney-client privilege, but you can't disguise something, a letter to your mom, and say attorney-client privilege. I mean, that gets people in trouble when they send a letter to their attorney, but it's really meant for someone else. And of course, attorneys can't get engaged in that or involved in that. They'd get in trouble. But that does happen. It was in a book or in an envelope or something that may have said attorney-client or something like that. And if that's the case, maybe law enforcement shouldn't have looked at it, but just marking it as such doesn't necessarily make it a privileged document.
Yeah, I didn't think it did. By the way, someone's pointing out that Wendy Adelson wrote a book as well. Yeah, it's kind of strange, I guess, if you're looking at it that way. So here's some of the sound bites that are interesting, and they all pertain to the walk the dog letter. This is from last Thursday's hearing. I'll play the first one. We'll get the guest reaction. This is a deputy sheriff on the stand.
What are you doing during this time? Do you recall?
I recall I'm still searching the folder.
All right. At some point during this search, there is a document found that is a 6-page document that is, I believe, at docket number 214, which says walk the dog on the top. Are you familiar with that document?
Yes.
Are you the one that found that document?
I am not.
Okay. Did you view the document that day?
I cannot specifically recall. I remember Sergeant Thomas, when he indicated he had found it, that was a brief, maybe a brief look at it,
All right.
but did not get a good description of it at that time.
You read that document at another time?
Not specifically like full on, but got more of a briefing from it.
So the documents were in the envelope that you were going through. Are you aware if some of those documents have since been found to be privileged documents?
Are you asking me, were they in that envelope that I
Well,
was
no, right,
searching?
I'm asking you if the documents that you were reading that were in the envelope contained privileged documents.
Yes, I wasn't reading them though.
Well, you were going through, you said hundreds of documents.
Yeah.
So you would have had to have at least read some to get an idea of what they were, correct?
Inspecting, looking at, the heading on it, like court paperwork to me is pretty obvious, like headings.
Well, there were a lot of handwritten documents in that envelope, correct?
Correct.
And you determined not to seize any of those documents, correct? Mm-hmm. And you, as you were reading those documents, you determined that some of them were privileged and you should stop reading them, correct?
I didn't read them.
So you see the back and forth there. Before we get to the content, look at this, Greg, from Thule Pool. He's been in the chat before. Hello, STS Nation from the Kingdom of Lesotho, it is pronounced. Greg Skordas, do you know where Lesotho is? I did not, and I now know where it is because Thule was in the chat. Any idea where Lesotho is, Greg?
I thought it was an African nation, but I could be wrong.
It is, and it is a landlocked country near South Africa. And one day, me, you, Megan, will do a live show, I hope, from Lesotho, Africa. So it's kind of crazy that with a laptop, you can open up and have people watching in Lesotho, Africa. But so, Greg, the defense attorney is a woman named Kathy Nestor. She's making a point, trying to put this guy on the spot. Do you know Kathy? Does she have a good reputation in the great state of Utah? And what do you make of this exchange?
Kathy's a very good lawyer. The woman that you just saw was her partner, Wendy Lewis, and they're both working on this case. Unlike the prior counsel who you've interviewed before that were representing Kouri, Kathy and Wendy are court appointed. They're public defenders for that county. Both of them have most of their experience in the federal courts. They don't have a lot of state experience, and this is a state case. But I think both of them are very, very competent lawyers.
Yeah. And Greg, what about this from Gail? What is the law when it comes to jail cells? I thought they could go in and basically look and take whatever they want. Is that not the case?
It is the case with the exception of attorney-client conversations. So if you're attorney, if I'm an attorney and I write my client a letter saying, here's some things we're thinking of doing, and it's marked on the cover, attorney-client privilege, they can't open that. By the same token, if a client writes me a letter, and which I get all the time from correctional institutions, they'll write attorney-client privilege, and then the guards, the wardens, whoever's sending the mail out, doesn't have an opportunity to look at it, except I suppose to make sure that it is in fact an attorney-client letter. And that's always the rub, that is just marking something attorney-client doesn't make it that way if it's intended really for something else.
One other quick question for Greg, then I'm going to get back to Megan. Clint Benson, I believe, is the brother-in-law. Do you know if he's Eric's brother-in-law, I guess, which would make him Kouri's brother. Do we know if he testified? I couldn't find anything. I read that he did. Do we know if he spoke at this hearing?
I don't believe he did. I don't know what you read. I trust you, obviously, but I don't recall him testifying or any information, news or commentary on him testifying.
Okay. I had read that was the case, but I couldn't find it, and probably never happened. Megan, to you, she's in jail. She's been in jail for the better part of 2 years. What do you think that experience is like for her? Do you think she's enjoying? She knows that she's got this notoriety now. I don't want to keep comparing to Lori, but there are similarities here. You know, and I know you're not an actual psychologist, as I said earlier, but narcissistic behavior is definitely prevalent. Do you think she's enjoying this? What do you think her experience in jail is like right now?
Well, I've never been to jail, Joel,
That's a good
or
thing.
prison. But from what I understand from, just reading and listening to other people talk that who have been in jail, that notoriety in jail is not necessarily a good thing, and I guess it depends on what you're known for. And there probably are some people in jail, as in real life, who don't like the arrogance of someone who believes that it's all about them, and you can get that vibe from somebody. So I'm not sure that she's a popular prisoner. And, I'm sure that jail has a pretty humbling effect on somebody who is used to getting their way and used to manipulating other people to get what they want. Probably the prison guards can't be manipulated very well. And so she's probably not having a very good time.
The question is, I bet you she's not. When is the trial date? Julie Frew, always on top of everything. April 28th. I'm actually planning to go to that trial. So I get to meet Greg and maybe, who knows, Megan in person, but Megan is a couple states over, but we'll see. So let me play this. This is another soundbite here. This is also discussing this went on for quite a while. This walk the dog letter is obviously something the defense really wants suppressed and something the state wants in. So this is yet more discussion about this.
Saying she's referred to this guy as the third person.
Right. She's talking about something that her attorney told her, correct?
Correct.
All right. So as you started to read this, you immediately saw that she was talking about something between her and her attorney, correct?
Correct.
But you continue to go on and read it?
Correct. So I scanned the document, and then fairly quick, she talks about basically what she's telling her brother to say.
Well, I understand that's what your interpretation of the document is, but let me back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. So when you come across documents that are privileged, do you typically go on and continue to read them?
They weren't marked as privileged.
When you come across documents about an individual's case that they've written?
We scan those documents, yes, to look for safety security threats.
You scan them or you read them?
Scan them. Or you read them until you determine that it's a legal document when it's a handwritten.
So Greg, here, by the way, what happened to Kouri's judge? That's Richard Mrazek. He's still on it. He's got one of the best voices. But speaking of the judge, Greg, when these exchanges are going on, it's his job here to decide whether or not stuff is going to be admissible. What is the judge doing? I mean, obviously listening, but beyond that, what is a judge in a proceeding like this actually doing? Like what I mean, they're responsible again for the ruling eventually, but is he sitting there taking notes? Is he just listening? What's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, this judge is quite meticulous, really a brilliant man. And he's taking notes. I'm sure that he's writing down a lot of things because he's got to prepare findings. He's got to prepare a ruling on the various motions to suppress. And I think there were actually 3 at the time that we heard on Thursday. So he's probably sort of outlining his outline, sort of getting his findings together so that when he sits down to write them up, he can remember, oh, at this point in the hearing, I heard this. At this point in the hearing, I heard that. And then he'll issue a ruling fairly soon because the trial's coming up in 90 days.
Yeah. End of April again. I believe it was April 28th. I miss Sky Lazaro. We reached out to her. She's got a really busy calendar, so she couldn't do it, but we'll get Sky back on. She was originally Kouri's defense attorney, and then a couple of different reasons prompted her to step back, which is probably a big loss for Kouri, but this is going on nevertheless. Here is the third and final soundbite, and then we'll go over a couple more things, get final thoughts. I'm going to show you a promo for the new channel, and we will call it a day. Here is bite number 3.
Has approved so many similar warrants and just probably knows that.
Well, the other issue that I think there's a scope of the inquiry here is that the warrant was issued. It says what it says. Is there a legal route for collateral attack on its scope at this point?
So,
I mean, once it's issued, isn't the only routes of attack either that it was secured through fraud? That's a Frank's hearing. Or that its execution was unreasonable. But as long as the information seized or secured is within the scope described by the warrant, is there a legal basis for the warrant was overbroad when issued kind of attack?
Your Honor, the state doesn't believe so. And to be clear, that the defense in their motion has not challenged the veracity of the probable cause under Frank's.
Understood.
The defense has not challenged the execution of the warrant. They are indeed challenging the four corners of the warrant as issued.
Help me understand, Mr. Ramos, what's your hook?
It's a lack of particularity described in what to search for within it.
And let's assume you're absolutely right about that and that the judge that issued it missed it, wasn't sufficiently attentive. At this point, though, where we have, I believe, good faith reliance on an overbroad warrant, isn't it black letter law that that's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Well, no, I don't believe so. If it was issued and it lacked particularity, Your Honor has the discretion to go back and either suppress it entirely.
Do I have that authority?
Well, if you do, Judge, based on case law.
Okay. And you'll be able to cite me to that?
The way I've read it, yes, Judge.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
that's assuming Your Honor believes it does, in fact, lack particularity.
Okay.
Greg Skordas, I'm glad you're here. Break that down for us. I don't think any of the women actually heard what he was saying because every single one was talking about his voice. But Greg, what was actually the content of that exchange?
Yeah, so that's going to be a tough one to describe. But there's what's called the good faith exception to a warrant, which allows that if the officers reasonably relied on the warrant and the judge's issuance of the warrant, even if they found things that, or even if the warrant was overbroad, or they took things that maybe weren't specifically in the warrant, if they did so with good faith, they're going to be excused. And I'm making a very broad legal argument, maybe oversimplified, but the state is saying the officers just had what they had. They had the warrant, and the warrant was what it was, and they found information. Should the judge have been a little more careful in what he or she was signing? Should the state or the law enforcement been more precise in what they were placing in there? Maybe so. But the officers who actually executed the warrant, Joel, did so acting under good faith. That's the argument of the state.
Yeah. By the way, Greg, what do we know about this judge? I mean, he appears young. He's got one of the best voices going. You said he's, bordering on genius, I guess. Is this guy like an Ivy League prodigy type? Do we know anything about his background?
I know that he came from one of the more prestigious civil firms in town. He was a very respected litigator there. So he would have been, at the top of his class wherever he went to law school, but I don't know the details of it. He's part of the 3rd District, which includes Salt Lake Summit and Tooele counties, and they sort of rotate around. But right now he is the judge in Summit County, which is where Park City is, which is where actually close by where this homicide allegedly took place.
Yeah. One of the things I can't get over, I'm just putting this up with no sound here, is Megan, when you look at Kouri Richins, I mean, she looks like a little deer, like a doe or something. She looks so innocent, like she's just looking up, she's stretching her neck. She's demure. She's, Lori had some different sort of reactions, but she looks like she couldn't hurt a fly or wouldn't want to hurt a fly. And this woman right here is accused of killing her husband, having tried to poison him once before. I mean, it speaks very heavily to human nature that you can't judge a book by its cover, but to me, it's kind of like amazing that this woman, and they're gonna, maybe put her hair up in a bun, like Ned Smith, put her glasses kind of sliding down her nose. What about this fact that looks can be very deceptive? What do you make of that?
Well, sometimes you can tell a lot about a person by the way that they carry themselves, their stature, their posture. If you go and rewind back to the very beginning of this clip that you're playing, you can see that she sort of has her shoulders hunched over a little bit and that she's looking up. She's got her chin down and she's looking up and she's got her eyes really wide. And it looks to me like she's trying to look innocent. It looks to me like that's not her natural posture, but she's trying to look that way. And that's what's always struck me about her. Every picture, every video that I see, she's got the big wide eyes. And there's a correlation there between, mental disorders, although since I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not going to comment necessarily on that. But there is a striking similarity between some of Kouri's pictures and some of Lori's pictures that we've seen. Lori with the wide eyes and the bug eyes type of thing. So it's interesting to notice those details.
Yeah, it's to me, I don't know, it's kind of eerie. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
All in one. So Greg, to you, now, as we were just talking about, Judge Mrazek, he wants both sides. He is asking for both sides. Nothing has been decided yet. This hearing was a lengthy hearing on Thursday. He wants both sides, in his mellifluous voice, he said, to submit written briefs about admissibility of contested evidence, and decisions are expected at a future hearing. I believe there's a hearing, by the way, on February 3rd. That's the next one, which should be in our calendar, everybody. At that point, he wants a draft jury selection questionnaire. But to this point, what happens now with this hearing? Both sides, how quickly, Greg, do you go back and write a brief, making your case that stuff should be suppressed or allowed in, whatever the case may be? And how soon after that does the judge read them and make his decision?
So the attorney should have the brief pretty much written, Joel, because when they filed their motion was essentially their brief. Now they've heard the evidence that came out at the hearing, so they can add that and supplement their motion. But their post-motion briefs, which is what the judge wants to read, so that he can look at that and say, okay, which of these makes the most sense, or which of these should I adopt, should be mostly written. But the judge is going to write his own, maybe some combination of what he gets from the two of them. And that should be fairly quickly because, like we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so, there's a trial coming up and both sides need to know what the evidence is going to be, need to know what's going to be admitted so that they can prepare for the trial.
Our friend from Turkey here with a super chat. Congrats. She was accepted to the Graduate School of Addiction and Forensic Sciences. That's pretty cool. Show was great. Thank you. This is Isagal Aksu coming to us from Turkey, as in the country. A final legal issue here, and then just a couple, maybe one or two things before we get closing thoughts. The Utah Supreme Court, Greg Skordas, they are being dragged into this to decide on expanding the jury pool to Salt Lake County. I think the defense is making the point or the case or the argument that this has been too high profile. People like me have been covering it. Ashley Banfield's been covering it on News Nation. So is this typical that it's now got to go all the way to the Supreme Court of Utah to figure out whether or not they can get jurors from different counties?
Very, very untypical. I've had cases in some of the small rural counties in Utah, Joel, where we've moved them to another county, moved venue. So it's in the same trial, but just in a different county because of pretrial publicity and whatnot. They're doing something really different in this case because I think they want to keep the trial in Summit County, but they want to bring jurors in from Salt Lake County. And that's unusual. Typically, you would just move the trial to Salt Lake County. You just move it to the different county where it doesn't have the pretrial publicity. But in this case, they want to grab jurors from the various counties. And that's something I haven't seen before. And I think that the defense has asked the Supreme Court to intervene and make sure that the judge does that correctly.
Greg, also, the judge is asking on February 3rd that they come with their jury questionnaire drafts. How big a job is that? I mean, Greg, is that the kind of thing that, with your experience, you can just do with your eyes closed right now, or do you have to take some real time to prepare that?
Well, the purpose of the jury questionnaire form, for the most part, I mean, it's always to find out what the jurors' biases are and whatnot. But this case has an additional level of problem, which is, what do you know, jurors, about the case? 99% of the cases we go to trial on, jurors haven't heard anything about it. But in this case, they have. And so it's going to be important not only to find out what they know, but what if they have formed an opinion. Because if they have, they can't serve as jurors. If they say, hey, I think she's guilty, or I think there's no way she's going to be found guilty, they may not be able to serve. And if you recall, we've talked about Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell a little bit here. They both got moved from the smaller county to the bigger county for that exact reason. They were tried in Ada County, where Boise is the biggest county in Idaho, because they wanted to get jurors who didn't know a lot about what was happening down in the various smaller counties where some of the acts occurred. So yeah, I think you want to make sure that the jurors are as sanitized from the media as possible.
And we are seeing the same thing with Brian Koberger as well. Happened in Latah County and being tried the same place as Lori was in Ada. But Greg, this should have been my very first question. Apologies to the family, but how is Eric Richins' family? How are they holding up through all this? And it's got to be a big challenge for them with the trial coming up.
Surprisingly well, very patient, very, very respectful of the job that's been done by the prosecution and the law enforcement, and just looking forward to the trial.
And Megan, you know this better than anyone else, being family here. Obviously, Eric Richins' family, he's the victim. In your case, you're the defendant's family. But what do you think the Richins are going through when you kind of peel the skin back a little bit, a little deeper down? It's got to be very obviously upsetting, but also frightening. You don't know if this woman's going to get convicted. You're on the edge of your seat. You want her to get justice. You don't know what could go wrong. Could there be a mistrial? So I don't know, the family's anxiety ahead of the trial. How would you describe that?
Well, I can attest to the fact that it is a unique challenge to be a family member involved in a high-profile case. It's not something that any of us want. It's not something that anybody has on their bingo card. Nobody really knows how to handle it until it happens to you. And then, there is a lot of anxiety. I remember how I felt during Lori's first trial, wanting to make sure that she got a competent defense, wanting to make sure that the judge ran his courtroom very officially and didn't have any type of bias, wanting to make sure that all of the evidence got in that was relevant. And, even with the overwhelming amount of evidence, I can remember my own anxiety, before the verdict was read, thinking that there might be a possibility that Lori would not be convicted, and the implications of that. So I can imagine the Richins family is going through some similar things here. And I'm grateful for the advocacy of Eric's sisters who, from what I understand, helped, to get the case investigated or taken seriously. And the statement that I believe one of the sisters made to not allow Kouri to have bail, the fact that they found more fentanyl after Eric's death, and that, she still had access to her children, is a really, really scary thought to me. So I can understand some of the things the family must be going through, and my thoughts are with them as they navigate this. And hopefully they have some good support systems and some good therapy. And I think we're all pulling for the best outcome for justice for Eric.
Yeah. Greg, please tell the family we're thinking of them. If they ever need a platform, our platform is always open to victims. They have got a platform in STS. Before we go and get final thoughts, the second channel starts today. We're going to roll it out very slowly because we can barely keep up with our own channel. But again, a lot of best guests came to us and said, hey, we want to do something. And that's how the idea kind of evolved. I used to be a sports talk radio addict, so I kind of put two and two together and thought it would be a really good idea. We're hoping this time next year there'll be content all day long from the best guests. But here is Doug McGregor, otherwise known as the Geo Profiler. He will have the first show coming out of the gates along with a COE, not co-hosting, but two separate shows. Rob D'Amico is supposed to have a show coming out, as well as Dr. Detective Troy Looney. But this is something that Doug McGregor put together himself as he prepares for his first show.
To know the artist, you must study their art. Geographic profiling is the background, not the portrait. It's the behavior that we do not see. It's the behaviors that we cannot change. It's the convenience, fear, and laziness offenders. It's how we interact with art.
I'm taking this back.
Profiling is the background, not the portrait.
It's all, there should be a thing about how we have Fisher Price equipment. I don't know why this thing is buffering, but I'm going to go back and play it again because Doug deserves a, let's see if it'll play. Everything appears good on my end. I don't know why this thing is buffering. Here we go. We're all family. I can.
The artist, you must study their art. Geographic profiling is the background, not the portrait. It's the behavior that we do not see. It's the behaviors that we cannot change. It's the convenience, routine, familiarity, and laziness that offenders are unmindful of. It's how we interact with geography, the environment, space, and time. Join me this month as the Geographic Profiler and Surviving the Survivor join forces to bring you an exciting new approach in the true crime space.
There you go. Follow him on Twitter at the Geo Profiler. You saw it right there. Doug has worked with some of the victims' families who we've done stories on. In particular, Rachel Morin's family. She was a 37-year-old mother of 5 who was murdered on a hiking trail, the Monpont Trail in Maryland. And she was ultimately, they have a suspect in custody now who happened to be an illegal immigrant. And now that has become a big talking point for the current president, something some of the family is okay with and other parts of the family are not okay with. But needless to say, they believe they have their man and there's going to be a trial. So huge thanks to the best guest here, Megan Connor, the mother of 6, which is hard to believe. She survived, as you heard earlier, sex trafficking as a child, spent almost 40 years in other abusive systems. And she now has an e-course on how to identify and defend against manipulative people. An e-course on how to identify and defend against manipulative people. The email to get the information is askmeegan with 2 E's, ASKMEEGAN @gmail.com. I have to agree here. It is not a tagline. It is our reality. The best guests in all of true crime. Megan and Greg are awesome. Megan, your final thoughts. I'm going to leave it wide open for you as it pertains to Kouri or anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, this is just, it's an interesting case. It's one that I've kept up with because of the similarities between her and Lori. I've been, really interested to understand her thought process and her behavior and, therefore understand a little bit more about Lori too and people like them. It's always, heartbreaking to me when a mother is involved in the murder of their spouse, or especially the father of their children, and the children are the ones who suffer the most. And I think that's really heartbreaking. So I'm looking forward to a good outcome on this trial so that the kids can have some peace and be with the people who love them and take care of them. And I'll just mention as well, I do have a podcast. I do have a YouTube channel. I am keeping up with Lori's case over there. Every time she files one of her badly spelled handwritten motions, I'll be reading it online. So,
and tell us where tell us the name of the podcast where we find it.
My podcast is The Midlife Revolution. My YouTube channel is just like all my social media at @3_verse.
Some people are saying that I have not a midlife revolution, but a midlife crisis. I've been perusing skincare products as of late to try to keep a youthful appearance, but gravity is starting to get the better of me. But I don't know why I'm bringing that up or where it's going, but I thought I would share it. Greg Skordas, one of the nicest guys you ever meet, even though I've never met him in person, but I'm hoping to meet him at Kouri's trial. Greg, are you planning to go to the trial being the family representative? And your final thoughts here.
I'm not planning to go to the trial. I just have a hard time seeing Kouri, and it would be difficult for me. I do look at Kouri and Lori and Chad and some of the other people we've talked about here, and it never ceases to amaze me what people will do for money, what they'll do for, let's face it, sex. And this is just probably another example. I'm looking forward to the trial and putting this behind the people of that area and the family.
Yeah. Greg, I don't want to pry, but what you said was interesting to me. You said you don't want to go because you don't want to look at Kouri. That's pretty personal. I mean, are you taking this as personally as it sounds?
No. I don't mean that. I have a hard time. Well, I guess I've spent a little too much time with the family, and so it's hard not to take it a little personally. But when she postures in court and they let her wear her nice clothes and the book and just the whole thing, that's a frightening personality.
Yeah, Greg is a great guy. That does not surprise me that he feels that way. Greg, again, please tell the family that we send our love. If we can help them in any way, Eric Richins' family, let us know, please. We're back on the new channel, the second channel at 2:00. I'm the guest, which is a bit problematic, but we'll have fun. We will see you there at 2:00. Apparently, there's an Adelson hearing tomorrow. We'll bring you a show on that. If it is in fact the case, we will see you in an hour's time. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Greg. And we will see you soon.